Hey there, Workforce. Chris here with Work to Game, and I am actually continuing on the trek of building. You guys will get to see some models in some upcoming videos, but this week it is time to do your prep. So we talked about bases last time, planning ahead. You need to kind of know your color scheme. You need to know kind of how you want it based so that you can start doing that. Maybe going ahead and getting some bases if it requires something like cork or foam or anything like that. If it's just going to be like a texture paint or you're going to put some little rocks and stuff on there, save that for later. But if you're actually doing something that's, I guess, structural, that now's kind of the time to do that. And so you've got your guy and you know whether or not you're going to be converting him. And so let's assume for the sake of this whole build process that we're building them right out of the box or a simple kit bash. At this point, you've got Sprue. Now, how you get guys off of Sprue is sometimes you can do it with a knife, but you want to be careful because anytime you put pressure there, it can kind of put pressure on the part and can damage the part. And what we're really paying for is not plastic. This is not worth its weight. We're paying for the detail. We're paying for the sculpt they put here. So let's not damage the sculpt trying to get off of Sprue. And so a lot of times what I use is Snippers. And I have different sizes of these. So depending on, sometimes I really have trouble getting in there. And so I can literally just go in and... So I don't know if you can kind of hear that. And then that, and I'll kind of snip it off into all these little parts. And there will be little bits of Sprue sticking off all my guys. And then I will go in and try to remove that, either with Snippers, or sometimes I'll go ahead and move to like a utility knife, right? This is something that it's still pretty crude, so I don't want to push too close to the part, but I can get this nice and adjusted, and I can make nice, slices there, keep it really sharp so that it doesn't break it by putting pressure. We're not trying to, carve away with a spoon. We're trying to carve away with a knife. So you do want to go ahead and keep this really sharp so that it kind of cuts through that Sprue with butter, so it cuts where you intend it to. And then after you get it off, there's an issue of mold lines. And so for those of you that don't know how these things are made, pewter things are made with spin casting. And so what they do is they take a piece of vulcanized rubber, and it's got basically a hole in it, and they drop it in, and the hot metal, because it's spinning, gets tossed outward. And as it gets tossed outward, it fills these molds. And they have little kind of lines coming off of them to let the air clean out, which causes suction. And then after they're full, they're done. So they basically make a mold. They know how much pewter to pour in. And then they let that cool. They break out the pewter. Off you go. There's very little to do there. With plastic, it's actually injection molding. It's incredibly expensive to manufacture, but once you have an injection mold right, a blank for an injection mold lasts a lot longer than a vulcanized rubber blank. And so you can get a lot more for it. Plastic's also a lot cheaper than pewter. Pewter can be cheap, but pewter is a very volatile market to base something around like this, where you want to sell a miniature at a consistent price. And so there's a lot of advantages to plastic on a commercial scale. Not to mention, if you ever run a horde army, a pewter army was very, very heavy. They're way different when you paint. You may have preferences on whether you like pewter or whether you like plastic, but honestly, we don't really get that choice anymore. We don't have, this, I can't buy my Space Marine in pewter or my Space Marine in plastic. So really, you just buy what you buy. They've made that choice for you. So the way injection molding works is you may see little spots like this, and these are where they can actually kind of fill, and so they shoot the plastic in, and it's kept under pressure. But in both of these cases, there's two halves to a mold. And so anytime there's two halves to a mold, there is a point where they meet, right there. And so under all that pressure, some of the plastic's going to push into the mold. And the mold is meant to fit perfectly, but even my fingers here, you can see my fingers aren't flat. There's that moment where they meet. And so molds have kind of the same issue, especially as they wear out. And so there's actually mold lines. And the mold line is going to roughly be right there, dead in the middle. So it's pretty predictable. And once you get a piece off of Sprue, you will want to go around and clean off the mold line. And sometimes it's worse than others. That can vary by the part on the Sprue. That can vary if you buy multiple boxes at the same time. It could be different box to box. And how you do that is a couple of things. I do a lot of it with like an X-Acto blade. Keep this blade very sharp. This particular one is dull because it's got some green stuff on it from another step. And so you can actually come in and I can shave off where it met the sprue, you know, and use all proper knife safety. Cut away from yourself. Keep it nice and sharp. And be careful. You don't want to damage your part here. You don't want to damage yourself here. You don't want to damage anything. I do a lot of this over a cutting mat so that I don't accidentally damage a surface, a nice dining room table or anything. So I just have the self-healing sewing mats. I have one here, and I actually have one over at my other desk. They've gotten a lot cheaper than they used to be. And then the other thing you can do is, if sometimes you can't get a knife in there, is you can own a nice set of files. And there are different kinds. You can try to make do with just one. So there's like a nice flat one here. I've also got some nice little like pointy, like triangular ones, so that they have like nice edges to them on all sides. I have rounded ones. And so depending on where I'm trying to get to and what I'm trying to file, these get really important when you talk about kit bashing or green stuff and things like that, making things blend. But even when you're just trimming mold lines, this is important. And it's a lot like painting a wall in your house. The prep work is 90% of the work, and it's not any of the fun. And it's not something people will see later, notice later, or thank you for later, but it is something important, and it is what makes the painting go better. So take your time, clean this stuff up, turn on a bad TV show that has like a nice bunch of series on Netflix, listen to it, and just sit there and clean them. And just have a pile of sprue over here, clean it and put it in the next pile. And then if you're worried you missed some, go back the other way and make sure you didn't miss anything. The better you do here, it is hard to get to mold lines later. Once you glue this stuff together, once you pin it together, however you're building your model, it is really hard to get to mold lines, especially in places like elbows, in between their legs, right there in the crotch area. Those are areas that, for the very same reason it's hard to get to with your file or your knife, it is really easy for material to build up in. And so those are really common areas. Sometimes you'll see it in like their necks. And where it's most noticeable is anywhere it ends up on a point that's going to catch light. So on, you know, maybe on like, let me see if I got a guy here. So on these like wolves here, right there on the back of them, I bought these out of a bit spin, and they didn't clean very well along the edge. So they thought it looked good along this edge, but they didn't think about the fact that it might have looked good enough, but it didn't look perfect. So when you put the two halves together, I actually have a perfect mold line running down the middle. And so a lot of times that's on shoulder pads, that's on shin guards, just depending on the sculpt. Now, a good sculpt, they're thinking about the mold line as they design it. They think about it with the way they pose, they think about it with the way they break it into parts, but they're trying to hide it, assuming you won't trim it. So definitely be on the lookout, because a great model, you'll trim it anyway. The paint will catch there, and it will become more noticeable once you prime. Paint will not hide it. And then once you paint over that primer, it will become even more noticeable. So really take your time, have a nice bright work light. If you need a magnifying glass or glasses or anything like that, definitely take your time and do the prep work. This plus priming are probably the two, in my opinion, more boring parts, but they make the biggest difference in the long run, and there's no way to go back and do them later other than to just regret it. And you can try to strip the model, you can try to break it apart. It's just get it right the first time. It's the reason we pay the premium to have stuff come in boxes rather than buying somebody else's used army, because we're assuming that they didn't take that level of care. So that is really where this week's lesson is, and we'll be working our way along. I don't have quite anything that I'm ready to show on screen yet, because I am actually still in the process of cleaning my mold lines and starting assembly, which is what we will be talking about next week. Assembly and magnetization, because as you assemble, that's a good time to do magnets. Sometimes it's easier to put magnets in before it's assembled, sometimes it's easier after it's assembled, and so we'll be kind of talking about that next week. If you guys have any questions, any comments, any other tricks or tips that you want to toss out to people that are cleaning mold lines this week, that's an important lesson. Those are the tools that I use. You may have other tools you use. I find that these work really great. Some manufacturers actually have like a release film that causes this to release from the mold. So you may find that even after you're done with that you may want to put these in just kind of a nice warm soapy sink and rub them off with toothbrush, your hands, light sponge, and then, you know, dunk them in clean water and let them dry out. Anything like that you want to do while they're in parts. You want to have a nice clean set of parts, a clean set of tools, if you will, to build your models from. And so you want to really take the time to get these off of sprue and get them prepared to be made into models. We spend an awful lot of money on these and we spend an awful lot of time playing with them. So just take your time. You can usually, if they're friends, they're going to understand, hey, I bought this box, I'd like to proxy them. I can proxy this for a few weeks while I'm building. Now they're going to get on me a little more the longer I do it, so you definitely don't want to take forever just playing with bases, but then you can slowly move towards pieces and things like that. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. My name's Chris with Work2Game. Hope you guys are having a fantastic week, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching. YouTube has a pretty cool video waiting for you over here. Our latest vlog is down below. For those of you new, subscribe is over here. And all of our other contact info is just right below me here. Thanks for watching.